Since the beginning of our society, there have been cults that have operated within its underbelly. While the gathering of like-minded individuals sharing their ideas and ideals is always inspiring, it can become dangerous rather quickly when cult leaders use the guise of religious and spiritual liberation as a means of convincing their following into committing crimes, obscure actions, and other heinous behaviors which take place behind closed doors. They each have their own unique origin story, but they share the common theme of a charismatic ringleader with keen manipulative abilities. Here are the top 10 most dangerous cults in recent history. Number 10. The Unification Church. Formerly known as the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity, the Unification Church was founded by Reverend Sun Myung Moon. He was born in North Korea. At the age of 16, he claims to have had a divine vision, saying that he must complete Christ's mission on earth. According to Moon's teachings, Christ was crucified before he was able to carry out his mission of marrying and having perfect children. Moon saw himself as the Messiah. He was excommunicated from his former Presbyterian church and went on to form his own church in the 1950s. Moon told his congregation that salvation was only possible by pledging their obedience to him. Only 7 years after its creation, the Unification Church became widely known for its mass weddings and arranged marriages. Each member of the cult has their spouse chosen by Moon himself. In the 1970s, he moved their headquarters to New York, where they attracted many new members and mounting suspicion. The anti-cult movement was gaining momentum during this time. The concerned parents of some members of the church went as far as kidnapping their own children in order to deprogram them. On top of this, they filed lawsuits, and by 1982, Moon was convicted of tax evasion. The church is still active today and is known as the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification. Number 9. Rajneeshpuram. Unlike your typical Indian guru, Bhagwan Sri Rajnish embraced all earthly pleasures. He owned 96 Rolls Royces, bought expensive jewelry, and promoted the indulgence of sex among his followers. Rajnish started his congregation in India in the 1970s. His philosophy was largely rejected for going against traditional teachings, and in 1981, Rajnesh moved to the United States. He attracted followers there and soon after purchased land in Oregon. Ma Anand Sheela, one of his followers, became a vital member of his inner circle. Together they created the city of Rajneeshpuram. Rajnish stopped speaking publicly, and Sheela was in control of daily operations. By 1985, there were more than 2,500 residents in their city, which had fallen into the midst of local tension. The previous year, Sheela orchestrated a program where they bussed thousands of homeless people into the city in order to register them as voters, in a failed attempt to sway the Wasco County court elections. Around the same time, Sheela and other leaders of the commune organized the first bioterrorism attack in U.S. history, poisoning food at buffets in the large town of Dalles. In their attempt to reduce the voter population, some 750 people were made sick. In 1985, Sheela, the other leaders, and some of their disciples fled the commune. Rajnish was deported for immigration fraud. Despite his death in 1990, his movement lives on. Number 8. Children of God. After hearing about the large hippie population in Huntington Beach, California, David Berg, a Christian minister, moved there to recruit young people. It was the 60s, and the hippies were immediately attracted to his anti-establishment ideology. Many of them quit their jobs and even gave him their life savings to live communally in Berg's house. He claimed to have received a vision that California would be struck by a powerful earthquake, and the group moved to Arizona. They began to call him Moses, and the children of God were born. In the early 70s, they began recruiting across the country, even going so far as setting up international recruitment centers. By 1974, they had more than 4,000 members in 70 different countries. Berg wrote a series of letters in order to relate his teachings throughout all of his communities. In 1978, they reorganized, renaming the group The Family. The U.S. anti-cult movement targeted the children of God in relation to their controversial teachings and explicit practices. Berg taught a progressive attitude towards sex. He encouraged experimentation and open sexual relationships. His followers were encouraged to engage in sexual relationships in order to attract new members, in a practice known as flirty fishing. By the 1980s, the group formally ended this practice after dealing with an influx of STDs. The group had also been accused of child sex abuse. In 1982, Berg published a book that showed his toddler stepson Davido being exposed to free love practices, adult women engaging in explicit activities with the child. Davido later changed his name to Ricky Rodriguez and in 2005 he murdered one of his former abusers, a nanny, and shot himself, leaving a video behind and stating that it was his revenge. Despite Berg's death in 1994, the group is still very active today and is now called the Family International. Number 7. Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments of God. This cult was founded by 4 ex-Roman Catholic priests, 2 former nuns, and 1 former prostitute. The movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments of God in Uganda placed full importance on the Ten Commandments. The leaders were convinced that the Roman Catholic Church had abandoned the commandments, and it was their duty to reinstill their significance. The leaders told of a doomsday prophecy that the world would end on December 31st, 1999. In anticipation, members began to sell and give away all their possessions. When the end of the world didn't come, the leaders altered their predictions, claiming that the Virgin Mary would come on March 17, 2000, in order to save the true believers and bring them to heaven. Still firmly believing in these prophecies, they held a feast on March 16th. When the 17th came, police discovered that a massive explosion had killed hundreds of the group's members. At first, it was assumed to have been a mass suicide, but after closer investigation and the uncovering of more bodies at other sites, all evidence pointed towards murder. The leaders of the group had murdered their followers, possibly out of a fear of the scrutiny for their prophecies' failure to materialize. We still don't know if they killed themselves or fled the country. Number 6. Shinrikyo. Master Ashara Shoko initially opened a yoga school in Japan, but after a trip to India where he reached enlightenment in the Himalayas, he changed the name of his school to Shinrikyo, meaning Supreme Truth. In 1987, he began teaching a combination of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity. He claimed to embody God, and his following grew rapidly. The group became increasingly radical, and by 1995 they had about 50,000 members, primarily in Russia. Ashara had begun to prepare for war, and he expected Shinrikyo to take over the government. In order to deflect police attention and to instigate the violence he had prophesied, Ashara organized an attack on the Tokyo subway. On March 20, 1995, 5 members of Shinrikyo boarded different trains on the subway. Upon arrival at Kasumigaseki, they each placed a package wrapped in newspaper under their seats and proceeded to puncture the packages with the tip of their umbrellas. They rushed off the trains as gas seeped out of the packages. They succeeded in killing at least 12 people and sickening 5,500 others. Authorities were able to trace the attack back to the group, arresting Ashara and other leaders, largely dismantling the group. Number 5. Order of the Solar Temple. In 1984, Joseph Di Mambro and Luc Jouret founded the Order of the Solar Temple in Geneva, Switzerland. They were one of the many groups that saw itself as a revival of the medieval Knights Templar. Jouret claimed to be both a reincarnation of one of the members of the 14th century order and Christ himself. The leaders prophesied that Di Mambro's daughter, Emanuele, would take the members of the group to a planet that revolves around the star Sirius after their death on Earth. It was a doomsday cult. Jouret and Di Mambro believed that the end would come in the mid-1990s. This vision was exposed as a hoax, and they lost several members, including Emanuele. In 1994, they believed the end was near, and that it was time for a transit to the new planet. On October 4th and 5th, 53 members of the order committed suicide or were murdered in Canada and Switzerland in order to enter the higher spiritual plane. The buildings were set ablaze after the deaths. The remains of Di Mambro and Jouret were found among the bodies. It was later revealed that Di Mambro had ordered the murder of an infant who he believed to be the Antichrist. 16 more members of the order died in France in 1995, and 5 more in Quebec in March of 1997. Number 4. Branch Davidians. After being expelled from the Church of the Seventh-day Adventists, David Koresh, born Vernon Howell, joined an offshoot called the Branch Davidians. He shared a deep friendship and affair with their leader, Louis Rodin, who named Koresh as her successor. After her death, David fought Rodin's son in a violent gun battle before taking full control in 1987. Among his controversial teachings as their leader was his New Light doctrine, which declared that all women were his spiritual wives, even those who were already married, and underage girls. He declared himself as the Messiah and preached of an imminent apocalypse. He accumulated a vast arsenal of firearms and faced mounting suspicion of child abuse. His congregation overlooked these allegations because it was his calling from God to carry out such acts. In February 1993, the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms raided their headquarters at Mount Carmel based on weapons charges. After a shootout and standoff lasting 51 days, The AFT battered the walls of the compound, sending in tear gas. A fire broke out, killing more than 80 members, including about 20 children, and David Koresh. Number 3. Heaven's Gate. In the 1970s, Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles began preaching apocalyptic prophecies about how salvation would come in the form of a spaceship, where their bodies would be kept in a cocoon-like state in order to transform them in preparation for heaven. They accumulated followers in California and Oregon. The group was called Human Individual Metamorphosis and later Total Overcomes Anonymous before they became Heaven's Gate in the 90s. To be a member, you had to give up your earthly possessions and your family. Applewhite encouraged members to detach themselves from emotion and entirely give up sex in order to perfect themselves. The members wore loose-fitting androgynous clothing and closely shaved hair. The group never consisted of more than about 60 people, and they stayed out of the public eye for a majority of their existence. With the emerging popularity of the internet, they set up a website to further spread their message. In 1997, the Hale-Bopp comet was approaching Earth, and a rumor sprung up that a UFO was following it. Heaven's Gate took this rumor very seriously, and they were convinced that salvation had finally come. In March 1997, all 39 members were found to have committed mass suicide in their preparation for heaven. Their website still remains on the internet. Number 2. The Manson Family. Charles Manson was born in 1934 to a 16-year-old single mother. He was raised by his aunt and uncle in West Virginia after his mother went to prison for armed robbery. He followed in her footsteps and spent the majority of his young adult life either in reform schools or prison. After being released in 1967, he moved to San Francisco and gained a small group of devout followers that became known as the Family. Unlike the other cults on this list, and most cults in general, the Manson family was not based around religion, although Charles Manson believed in Satanism and Scientology, along with other bizarre ideologies. The primary belief was that he was a prophet of sorts. Manson predicted a race war. He planned to have himself and the family hide out for its duration, then emerge and take control in the aftermath. Manson sent his followers to carry out a series of murders, intending that they be blamed on black people in order to instigate the beginning of this race war. In August of 1968, members of the Manson family killed several people, including Sharon Tate, an actress who was pregnant at the time. The following night, they murdered 2 others and wrote messages on the walls in their blood. Manson himself never killed anyone, but he had such a control over his family that they would do anything for him. They were all sentenced to death, but got life in prison after California banned the death penalty. Number 1. The People's Temple. Jim Jones was a Pentecostal preacher who began the People's Temple in the 1950s in Indianapolis. After reading a magazine article about places to survive a nuclear holocaust, he moved his congregation to Ukiah, California in 1965. Over the next 5 years, the members of the People's Temple went from less than 100 to several thousand. Jones was able to build up a significant amount of political prowess, as he had thriving churches in both San Francisco and Los Angeles. Meanwhile, Jones had just begun building a commune in Guyana known as Jonestown. In 1977, Jones heard that New West magazine wanted to publish an expose on life within the People's Temple, and he and his congregation fled to the commune in South America. In light of the mounting concerns in former members and the relatives of the members, U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan flew to Guyana to visit Jonestown and learn more about it. Just before he was about to leave on November 18, 1978, Jones's men arrived at the airstrip and killed the congressman, along with several others. On the same day, Jones ordered his followers to drink poison-laced punch as armed guards stood by. More than 900 people died, including 300 children. Jones himself did not drink the Kool-Aid and died by a gunshot wound to the head. We hope you enjoyed today's video. Have you ever had any experiences with the cult? Let us know in the comments below.